self-love for yourself, self-love for the things that are around you, the environment that you live in, the nature that you live in, the world that you live in, the community that you live in. That starts your conscious journey.
I'm very excited to bring you this episode with Sophia Li, where we talk about her incredible journey from Vogue editor in New York to jumping off a burning plane, which sparked her alignment with her purpose and shift to using her platform for sustainability, as you'll hear. You're listening to Going Conscious, the podcast where we discover new ways to live a more conscious life of fulfillment and freedom. Each week, I speak with entrepreneurs, academics, and changemakers who have gone through big changes, left unfulfilling lives behind, and found meaning in this new world where purpose drives success. Let's get inspired to transform and unleash our unique journeys to the fullest. Let's explore the impact we want to make, challenge how we view our environments, and deepen our understanding of ourselves and this beautiful world around us. Live your freedom. I'm your host, Nikki Trott. In this episode, we talk about synchronicity, how if you're passionate about what you believe in, the world will meet you there, the vote you make every time you purchase something, how fashion is inherently unsustainable, how to shed the labels society gives you, the difference between self-care and self-love, how to align with your soul's purpose, and how to understand who you are first on your path to consciousness. That's a lot of inspiring topics. Listen to the end to hear recommendations for the books Sophia's reading at the moment too. So, let's dive in. Okay, Sophia, hi.
Hi, Nikki.
Thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me.
How are you?
How are you is a very loaded question, I think, during these times. But all things considered, I'm alive, I'm breathing, I'm grateful, and I'm healthy. So that says a lot.
That's great. Yeah, it is a loaded question right now, indeed, and something that I think we can no longer just say fine to, can we? So much is changing around us so quickly.
Yeah, and I think when I ask people and they're like, oh, I'm good, I'm like, really? And I ask them again, because it's almost like you can't be fine right now. You can't be good. You can be like joyous and like grateful, but not, I think there's just such a range of emotions everyone's feeling right now. So I asked them again. I'm like, no, really, how are you?
Yeah. And isn't it wonderful how we're actually able to do that, and we're getting to a deeper, more real level in so many different relationships and situations?
Yeah, no, it really is beautiful. I think that before the pandemic, how are you and vulnerability was very trendy. It was a big buzzword, but it was still very curated, at least in New York. I feel as if we only chose to be vulnerable when we were allowed to or when we had space to. But at work, we were still expected to be a certain way. So it's nice that vulnerability is just across the scale so tapped into now.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, Sophia, I am really interested to hear about your personal journey and how you've gone from Vogue editor to really pursuing sustainable fashion and various different sustainability concepts with your platform.
Yeah, of course. So I think the shift was a long time coming. Looking back on it now, I was like, oh, that is sustainability is something I've always been so invested in. And I didn't even realize, sustainability as a term didn't even exist just a few years ago. So at least in fashion sustainability. So it's always been something that I've been super passionate about, but I just didn't tune into it. I just didn't tap into it. It's like, this buzzing that I always had around me, like almost like I just ignored it for so long. And when I was the entertainment media editor at American Vogue, I was working on a lot of the content creation, the social and digital voice for Vogue.com. I would travel quite often. And then also there'd be so many photo shoots where, we would have one studio just for the shoot and then maybe like two studios just for the clothes and the shoes and the jewelry. And it was just such an excess of stuff. And it took a while for me to tap into, oh, you actually don't like living in a life of excess. you like living a life that is intentional and meaningful and having very curated items that mean a lot. And that's on a micro level of sustainability in a personal way. And I think it took me, after I left Vogue to go independent, it took me a few, I think I was always advocating for it, but again, I was advocating for it and then there was no job opportunities. And then what started happening was, because I was still advocating for it, it also simultaneously in the world became a little bit more well-known and a little bit more accepted and discussed, and consumers got curious, even if the brands were trying to hide what they were doing. So the timing in the world was there was a lot of synchronicity there. And I just believe that if you're always passionate enough about what you already believe in, the world will meet up with you at a certain point. It might take a while, but it'll happen. So I always think of the Henry Ford quote where he says, if you ask the people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse before he invented cars. Like a lot of general people don't even realize what they necessarily want until it's like introduced to them. So it's like, we didn't even realize we wanted, I mean, yes, the activists, of course, but we didn't even realize we needed sustainable living in the sense of in the fashion industry and beyond, until we realized that it was possible.
Until we realized it was possible. So what is sustainability in fashion to you then? So I think it can mean so many different things.
Yeah, of course. I think sustainability at its core means that every action has a reaction in life. And this applies to everything. And basically, humans are the only species, the only living things in the world that every action we have has like a degenerative effect onto the world, when everything else, even plants, animals, their reaction in the world is regenerative. So sustainability is just coming back into equilibrium, which the indigenous communities, they've always understood this harmonious relationship with nature. It's just coming back into the equilibrium of Mother Nature and what it means to be alive on this earth. And instead of taking and not giving back, it's this very balanced and equal energy exchange that's happening. And that can range from on a personal level to a macro level, which is like corporations and government and societies. So
I love that. That's a really beautiful description. And so it's really about coming back to our equilibrium.
Yeah, exactly. And fashion history, when we're talking about fashion sustainability, that can go into like more nuance, the material, the fair wage and fair labor, the supply chain. Like that is what makes a sustainable fashion brand. But also I think that, the most sustainable fashion item you can buy is actually the thing that is already in your closet. And it gets a little bit confusing because people say don't buy fast fashion. But if you're buying fast fashion secondhand, or, at a secondhand thrift store, then you're extending the life cycle of that garment. So then that is sustainable in itself. So sustainable fashion, I think, is more almost a lifestyle as well, is understanding if you want to be supporting climate justice, and you have to be supporting human rights. And fashion is also such a huge women's rights issue, because over half of the hands that touch our clothes that make it are women, they're female. And so if you want to support women's rights, human rights, then we have to support kind of the labor that goes into who makes our clothes.
Wow, over half of the hands are women's. So how can we start to support women's rights and human rights more in fashion?
Yeah, well, one, I think people underestimate how much purchasing power we have. So every time we buy something, that again goes back into my definition of sustainability. Every action has a reaction. So every time we buy something, that has a reaction into the world. There's this beautiful quote. It says, every time we buy something, we cast a ballot for the kind of world we want to live in. So every time I buy fast fashion, I'm actually voting for fast fashion brands to survive. I'm voting, technically, in a kind of metaphorical sense, I'm voting that I want, these women to be completely underpaid, and for microplastics to exist in the ocean, for textile waste, for dead stock exists. There's like there's so many things that come with supporting fast fashion brand with your purchasing power. If I am only purchasing from either sustainable fashion brands or secondhand, or not even, let's say, reducing my fashion consumer purchases and only shopping a handful of times a year for very necessary things, then even my non-action in buying is a vote. So even though I'm not buying fast fashion or I'm buying less, that still is casting a ballot into the world that's saying, I want a long cost per wear. I want long life cycle. I want to extend the life cycle of this garment even longer before it goes into landfills or a textile landfill. So I think purchasing power is really important.
So you're really giving the power back to the consumers there and saying you can do something by what you choose to do and what you choose not to do from today.
Yeah, 100%. And I think the power was always with the consumer, but well, one, we weren't even introduced to so many options before. When I was, coming into young adulthood as a teenager, and I loved fashion and I worked in retail, if I wanted to have my own sense of style, I used my own very limited teenager income from a part-time job to buy clothes. And, what I could afford at that time was fast fashion. And because I was in a small town, not like a big city as in New York City, secondhand and thrift stores didn't even exist in the place I was growing up in. So I think that a lot of it has to do with awareness and education and having more options as well. But yes, we've always had this purchasing power.
So in terms of making the right choices then as a consumer in purchasing sustainable fashion, how can we do that? How can we know? So, okay, we know that fast fashion is not going to be a good option, but how can we know what is a good option?
Yeah, I think that as this goes to not just fashion purchases, this goes to when you buy your food, this goes when you buy anything. Are you supporting a small independent business, a small business owner? Are you supporting the local organic farmer that is 20 miles away from you? Who are you supporting? Like, ask yourself, when you buy this, do you know who's getting your dollars or the profit from it? So making the right decision as a consumer, and this applies to everything, not just fast fashion or in fashion sustainability. It applies to your food, the produce that you buy. It applies to the fashion. It applies to the beauty brands. And are you supporting small independent businesses? Are you supporting the mom and pop store? Are you supporting the organic farmer that lives 20 miles away from you? Or are your dollars going directly to these huge corporations? And these corporations, let's say, they might have some of the biggest carbon footprints in the world and really monopolize the system. Like, what kind of system are you supporting? Are you supporting a system that's small and independent and something that you believe in? Or are you supporting, which capitalism? And so it's just two different ways of looking at sustainability and just understanding the story and directly who you're supporting with your dollars. Even if it's like, you're just buying toilet paper and you're like, oh, but I'm only buying toilet paper from Amazon. And it's like Jeff Bezos is already the richest man in the world and had accumulated more wealth during the pandemic than ever because Amazon has skyrocketed. But if you buy toilet paper from the local independent mom and pop store that they're feeding their entire family based off of the proceeds they make, that in itself can be sustainable.
Yeah, absolutely. It really does go across everything. So I'm wondering, can fashion be sustainable? Because that's something I ask myself a lot. So shopping secondhand, of course, you're increasing the longevity of something that's already had all of the energy put into its creation. But as long as fashion's about trends and about newness and about comparison with others, can it really be sustainable?
I think at its core, fashion cannot be sustainable in the sense when we're saying sustainability is a circular, interdependent definition. Because if garments and virgin textiles are always being produced, then that's not sustainable. But there are fashion brands where it's a circular system, it's a circular economy, and it's already taking products that are in production or already produced and putting them back into the marketplace. And that can be sustainable. But fashion as a whole, it's not sustainable because you're always producing new garments.
So for you then, what are you passionate about promoting within this sustainable fashion realm?
I don't necessarily focus only on fashion sustainable when I promote sustainability. I think because one, fashion sustainability is very nuanced, like what we're talking about. There's not a right or wrong answer. You know, people are like, oh, this t-shirt is made from plastic bottles, so it's recycling. And it's like, yes, but then that t-shirt releases microplastics into the ocean. And it's like, there's a lot of nuanced layers in fashion sustainability. So what I try to promote is this over-encompassing concept of sustainability, because that is when people can start to understand sustainability in a way where they can make their own conclusions.
So this overarching sustainability, does that mean it's more like sustainability as a lifestyle?
Yeah, sustainability as a lifestyle, exactly. And sustainability to me also is, this podcast is about going conscious. Being sustainable and being conscious, having a conscious lifestyle, that is interchangeable to me. Like that literally means the same thing to me. When you're sustainable, you're very conscious of your existence and your presence on earth.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. You can't have one without the other. The more that you go down a path to becoming more conscious, it's all about this awareness. Then every decision you're making, every action, the impact that you have on the world, however big or small, becomes something much more considered.
Yeah, exactly.
So for you, can you pinpoint one moment or kind of key influence that brought you down this road to a more conscious path, a more conscious career?
I think that as easy as it would be to say this was my one moment, everyone is conscious. And everyone, I think this pandemic too, COVID, has helped us realize that we were always, it has reminded us of our humanity, which sounds so silly and so simple, but the amount of times I've heard parents being like, it's been such a joy just playing with my kids. And, you know, something as simple as that, or it's been such a joy just like reading a book in the middle of the afternoon, or not looking at my phone, or not knowing what day it is, not knowing the time consistently. Like this COVID situation, as dark as it's been, there's been a lot of lightness, and it's reminding us of what it means to be human. And that ultimately means consciousness. So I wouldn't say there was one moment in time that was like, oh, okay, now I need to live a more conscious lifestyle. But I think there were many moments, and some of them were, you know, big magnitude moments, and some of them were little like ricochet moments. Some of them, you know, and some moments shook me to the core, being like, okay, I need to make a change in my life. And if I look back on it, I realize that the universe is always trying to give us signs and clues if we're not aligned with our path, if we're not aligned with the career journey or any kind of journey that we need to be on. And when I was at Vogue, I knew I wanted to leave for a while, but I was very stuck in this mindset and this notion of what society and my parents, and probably also my unconscious self, tells me about what success should look like, a title, an identity. And I realized that my identity was, if you asked me who I was when I was at Vogue, which was, you know, a few years ago now, I would give you identity labels. I would be like, oh, I'm an editor, I'm this. And I wouldn't actually tell you who I am. So that's like a big sign is of not being fully conscious of who I am, is if you describe yourself based off of these labels that society gives you, rather than really just describing yourself. Does that make sense?
It does. It absolutely does. I love that. It completely resonates. I've definitely had moments like that before in my life too, of being an agency director and having certain ways that I would define myself that were really just based on illusions and things that you think you've been taught, or that you probably have been taught that you need to achieve to build your self-worth, but they're just external and nothing to do with your worth actually at all.
Yeah. Exactly. And I think that's one of the first questions, and that could be a really easy kind of exercise that anyone does with themselves when someone asks you who you are. You know, when you're at a bar, when you're at a wedding, when you're traveling and you're meeting strangers and you're outside of your bubble and no one knows who you are, how are you going to present yourself? What are you going to say about yourself first? Are you going to use all these label and identities that the society gave you, or are you going to really show who you truly are? And then that's like one of the first steps into really understanding consciousness, because then you finally know who you are. You can't get to consciousness if you don't understand who you are yourself first. And there were so many moments that at Vogue I realized that maybe was, you know, a shift or a defining point when I look back. Emotional things, like physical things. I think that if we listen to our bodies enough, it's the first sign of defense if we're not aligned or in tune with who we need to be. You know, I was having panic attacks. I was couldn't sleep, or I would sleep way too much. And there are a lot of physical clues. And then I was totally ignoring that. And one of the bigger life moments that really had me reflect on where I was in my life and asking myself if I was happy with or not is when I was on a plane to my older sister's wedding, and I was the maid of honor. And it was like my 12th flight that month. I had been flying all over the world for work previously. And finally, at the end of the month, I was going to my older sister's wedding. I was flying from New York to San Francisco. As the plane was taking off, the right engine caught on fire, and we had to evacuate via the chutes, the slides that pop out of the side of the plane. And
wow.
We emergency evacuated. Everyone was safe, thankfully. We ran to this grassy area because they told us to run after we slid off because, I don't know, the plane might have exploded. And it all happened so fast, right? And looking a few weeks later, after the wedding festivities, and I could finally catch my breath and process everything that had happened, I really realized that we're not scared of death by any means, because death happens so quick. But what we're scared of, and we're told this all the time, life is short, life is short. And it almost sounds cliche, but until we go through a moment like that, or where we ourselves are very sick, or someone close to us are sick, that sentiment of life is short is just shoved in front of our faces, and there's nowhere to go besides like facing that head on and asking ourselves, if life is actually this short as we've been told this entire time, what are we going to do? How are we going to spend this time? And am I happy mostly with the life I have now? And a lot of times, maybe that answer is no. And I think every single person on that plane, there was a reason for that to happen to them. So maybe they could reevaluate what was happening in their life. Wow.
Incredible. So you really realized, if life's so short, how do I want to spend this time? Am I happy?
Yeah. And am I happy it's a hard question to answer, because happy in itself is an emotion. And as we know, like, emotions are fleeting. So it's like, if we're constantly chasing happiness will it will leave us. It will be fleeting. So it's not even like, am I happy? But it's like, am I myself? Am I content? Do I feel purposeful? Do I feel fulfilled? Do I feel aligned? Do I feel in tune with my values? And sometimes you don't even know what your values are, because it's values that society gave you. But then you're like, wait, let me peel back these layers and be like, what do I actually really care about? What kind of life do I really want to live?
What kind of life do I really want to live? So is that the question you were asking yourself after that experience then? And how did that change your perspective?
I mean, after that experience, I was like, wow, I wasn't afraid of dying at all. I mean, it was more like, obviously you go into very survival mode, but I was like, in that moment, I didn't even think about dying. I thought about all the things I wasn't going to do if I died. And that's the difference, is that we're not scared of death. The fear actually comes from not living the life that we want to live, or not living all the things that we had planned for our lives. You know, my sister's wedding, and leaving Vogue, and starting another separate career of that, and meeting a partner, having kids. You know, these visions you have for your life, they're just kind of can be taken away, stripped away in that finite moment of where you're like, oh, hello. And I think we almost get a bit complacent if we don't have those moments. So that was definitely a sign from the universe, I think. And one of my favorite quotes is that they say hell is when at the end of your life, hell is when you meet the person you could have become. So basically, hell is like, I will meet Sophia, and it's Sophia who like actually lived her life to the fullest and was purposeful. Whereas, maybe I didn't take those risks. So, yeah.
Yeah, I love that one too. I think it charges so much a sense of bravery, of being able to just take the reins yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's another big learning lesson is that we not that we have control over our lives, because I do believe in a life's purpose and a predestined soul. But I think that a lot, and I remember my energy healer told me this, you have a destiny and there's 3 ways to get there. And she was like, you were taking the hardest route to get to your destiny when it could have been just a straight shot. And some people get it, it's a straight shot. Some people, they like take a little detour and get there. And she was like, you were going off the highway and into these local roads and gonna get lost forever before coming back. And I was like, okay. I was like, got it. And that's okay. That's a learning lesson too. And I needed that in order to be where I am now. So yeah, exactly. I have another friend who says, and excuse me,
it's all part of the journey.
She says, you can't fuck up your destiny. So no matter what you do, no matter how many risks you take, and you have to take the risks. That's the thing too. She was like, you can't fuck up your destiny. You'll get there. So just like go for it and make mistakes. So I thought that was a good one too.
Yeah, I love that too. So how did you go about leaving Vogue then?
I think
what was it like for you to take that step?
Once there's mental clarity about a step like this, it's more just logistical. So, and after that experience, it was quite obvious to me and what I needed to do. And I think that the universe will test you to see if you're actually committed to this decision, just as like a final test. So when I try to leave, it took me until like September the following season to leave. So it took me a few months to leave. And I think that every time when I first told my boss and our creative director I wanted to leave, I was offered with more pay compensation. And I think that in itself is almost a test from the universe being like, are you sure you don't, like, you really want to leave? Are you going to pick money and prestige over your soul's purpose? And I can say that looking back now, but in the moment I was like, oh, wow, maybe I should stay. Like, why am I leaving? But then ultimately you realize why you have these experiences and that mental clarity in the first place. And yeah, and all you have to do is sometimes like, you just have to jump. Like for me, jumping from the ship of Vogue was like so much harder than sliding off of a plane that was on fire. Like sliding off of a plane that was on fire seemed so easy.
Wow. Jumping off the plane that was on fire was so easy compared to jumping off the ship that is Vogue.
Yeah, because it was so entrenched in who I was and my identity, but that you rebuild that. But in the moment, you're like, whoa, who am I even? It was, yeah. So redefining yourself, that is a big one too.
So we talked earlier about this whole sense of how you define yourself based on what you think your identity is and how that's a really important facilitator in your consciousness journey. So I'm wondering how that's changed for you. How do you define yourself now?
Yeah, now I'm like, oh, there's this quote that I always say, it depends on the situation, of course, but I try to define myself as a spirit being now, because I've realized this whole journey, we're all humans, yeah, but we're spirits living in these human bodies. So instead of being a human being, I'm a spirit being, and I'm a storyteller. I'm passionate about people. I'm someone who lives in accordance with my sustainable values. I am a child. I'm young spirit and an old soul. These are the kind of descriptors that I now use. And also it depends where I am and who I'm talking to. And sometimes I just, because in New York, what do you do is top of the list of questions people ask as soon as they meet you. It's like, what's your name? What do you do? And where do you live? Top 3 questions people ask in New York when they first meet you. And I hate that question. What do you do? Because it's like, oh, a job title is supposed to encompass everything about you. And a lot of times we unknowingly give judgment to that job title, whatever it is. Oh, you work in finance? Ooh, got it. Oh, you work in fashion. Okay, interesting. There's all these like preconceived notions attached to these job titles. So instead of asking what people do, I ask them what they're passionate about, because I still want to know about a person. I still want to know who they are and how they define themselves. But instead of saying, oh, what do you do? I'm like, what are you passionate about? It's interesting to hear what people have to say about that. And a lot of people are really, it's funny when they're really shocked by that question, because I feel like New Yorkers are like, oh, what do you do? And they're like, have a spiel ready. They're like, oh, well, I'm blah, blah, da, da, da. And then I'm like, what are you passionate about? They're like, what? Passion?
Yeah, that totally resonates with me. I mean, being from London, people ask you, what do you do? Where do you go to school? And when you go to New York, well, I've spent a lot of time there for work, and I completely agree. It's what do you do? Where do you live?
Yeah.
And when I moved to Berlin and spent a few years living there, it was so incredibly freeing. Nobody asks you what you do.
Oh, I love that.
It's just not a topic, and you can meet people a few times. Of course, at some point your work will come into things depending on the context, sooner or a bit later, but it's so freeing. And it made me realize that the more we answer that question with our own, as you say, kind of pre-written script, or you really put yourself in a box, and it's really just reaffirming to yourself, I am a Vogue editor. I am nothing more than that and nothing less than that, whatever that means to me, whatever that maybe means to the person I'm speaking to. But you really just constrain yourself more than anyone.
Yeah, 100%. That's so well said. And I think that because of COVID and this pandemic of being in quarantine and everyone staying at home, these notions of how we introduce ourselves are all going to shift. This will be a new paradigm of society, because a lot of people now, they don't have jobs because they were either furloughed or, their job situations have changed during this pandemic. And so I think a lot of people will start to shift from it in New York, of instead of asking, what do you do? Because that's a very sensitive question now. It's not as easy as like, oh, what do you do? It's I think that's going to change a lot, which I'm actually really happy about.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I love your question about passions. And I also think, a question that I love to ask you was just, what do you care about? And that's how you can really understand work is such an impermanent thing. It's constantly evolving. It's within so many illusionary structures, and, amazing things can be done through our work. Absolutely. But really where it should be coming from is what we care about. And hopefully people are coming closer to what they care about through this time.
Yeah. Yes. Love that.
I think also I'm hoping that we will see, and I believe that we are seeing, a change in what we value as a society. So, your example of you're in finance, oh, you're in fashion, wow. It's kind of hopefully changing a bit around what do we value? What do we want to move closer to?
Yeah, exactly. I totally agree. And I think that during this time, I mean, in America, we have two pandemics right now, which is one of the pandemics obviously being COVID, and the second one being innocent Black lives dying all the time. And that has been happening. But I think that there's been this huge awakening to kind of the injustice that we live in, and the paradigms of society that we lived in, like white supremacy, that have existed, that we uphold, and we're like, wait, why have we been abiding by these rules for so long? They don't serve anyone. So I think that also, just looking at our social media feeds, the amount of content that, if you looked at the content 3 months ago, it would have been, I don't know, maybe cute outfit pictures from influencers or wherever. But this thing that I dub as conscious content wasn't a thing at all on a mass scale. And now you look at your feeds and it's so much activism, so much powerful and thought captured in an Instagram post. And I think just our content feeds have shifted so much in 3 months. And the content in our Instagram feeds really is a reflection of what society is going through as a consciousness.
That's so true, to see those feeds as a reflection of what our society is going through. And as they've really just completely shifted into conscious content, what does that mean for our consciousness as a society and where that is today?
Yeah. Yeah, but that it's we're like reaching a level of consciousness on a mass scale of humanity that I think we haven't before in modern society. And that's really exciting and beautiful that we're living through it. And as hard as all of these things may be, it's also a really beautiful time. I think it's very yin and yang. With a lot of darkness comes a lot of lightness, and they're coming head to head, like battling right now.
Yeah, I feel that too. And I also just realized more recently how we're really calling for the same thing, where we're looking at sustainability, where we're looking at Black Lives Matter. It's actually the same. It's about respecting all life equally. And we have to completely change our systems to get there.
Yeah.
A lot of darkness, but a lot of light.
Yeah, exactly. We're on both ends of the extreme, dueling it out.
And there's been a lot of talk about, how will this all last after the COVID time? Will this awakening, if we can call it as such, will it continue? What do you think?
Well, I am fundamentally an optimist. So I want to say that we as a humanity are changed forever. Whether or not we go back into like old life patterns and things like that, I think there's been a shift of consciousness, of rediscovering what it means to be human, of such dark institutions that we've upheld that have been shattered. I think there's been a huge shift, and we'll never go back. And maybe there will be things that happen again is reminiscent of normal life, or what we considered as normal before these pandemics. But I think we're forever changed. We just, like, as a society, we can't just pretend like none of this happened. It's been so raw, and we're being turned inside out. Like, literally, our societies, our energy, we're just completely being turned inside out. And that's not a bad thing. So I think we're going to remember these lessons for a very long time. And that would just be the saddest thing, actually, if we forgot all these lessons. I don't think that's going to happen, because change is already happening. Like, for example, last week, it was like the week of resignations, and, everyone from Adam Report at Bon Appetit, and, the CrossFit CEO, the Wing, like everyone who was in a position of power that didn't uphold kind of the justices were come to terms with now as a society are stepping down. And that means there's more democracy and leadership that can come from the masses to just reinvigorate a whole new system that we've never seen before. So I'm going to stick to that. I really, truly believe that. And hopefully that is the route that we go in.
Yeah, I'm an optimist too. I think we've experienced too much.
Yeah.
And so for you personally, have there been any key changes or realizations that you've gone through in this time?
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of lessons. One of the key changes is that even before this, and I was very aware of producing and bringing conscious content into the world, I think I was still doing a lot of things, even with my awareness level, that I look at now, and I almost have this thought of, who was I doing that for? Who was I going to that event for? Who was I? Those are the moments that I've realized that have shifted. There's so many things that we normalize and before the lockdown that maybe just aren't necessary to serve our life anymore. I just think that, for example, fortunately, I'm part of the percentage of people that can work from home, and I'm very grateful for that. But that in itself, work dynamics, and, every other night I was at an event or a dinner, and now I'm just looking back at that lifestyle, and I'm like, who was that for? What was I gaining from it? And I think at that time I was like, oh, I'm gaining connections and friends and building community. And you realize, like, you don't need any of the frills and the glitter or the fluff, the lace and the frills to make connections. And it's almost like we forgot, not that we forgot, but it just became the norm. There's so many things we normalize that right now I'm like, it sounds like such a luxury. an unnecessary luxury per se.
And how does that feel then? Kind of realizing that you don't need all of those frills.
Yeah, it feels freeing.
Things.
I think there's this Indian author who wrote in a beautiful article, and he called the pandemic a portal. And he was saying, this pandemic will be a portal. Are we going to walk through these portal gates into the future with carrying our heavy loads of capitalism and what we know of life to be? Or are we going to shed that weight and leave it behind in the past and walk through the portal gates free and light and ready for this new future? So I think about that a lot. Like, what am I shedding? What am I still carrying that I don't need to be carrying anymore? And how can I walk through those gates as light as possible?
Do you have any kind of personal practices around that, or how do you process that kind of lesson and bring it into your life?
Yeah, I mean, there's things I do daily, and there's things that I do at bigger chunks of time that kind of help me. I'm a person who has never viewed time in the same way. I'm a person that has never viewed time as linear. I've always viewed time as a continuum, even when I was younger. So I kind of am not the best. It's a good thing, but also it's a bad thing because I don't process things, events, certain moments that happen to the world or personally in a normal way, almost, I think.
What's normal? I completely agree with you. I also don't see time as linear. I can't say that since I was a child, although I think I had some sense of it, but it took a lot of experience. And then also reading philosophy, reading physics, and understanding different angles, and also meditation. And for me, Vipassana meditation, and the culmination of all of these things helped me to finally be able to understand at a slightly deeper level that time isn't linear, in fact.
And that's a beautiful thing to know, that time isn't linear. So if future Nikki and Sophia, they're also having conversation, and we're having a conversation, it's simultaneously happening all at once, which I think is really beautiful. It's like kind of a mind boggle, but it's also really beautiful. But because I don't view time as linear, I'm like constantly working on myself, and I'm constantly like in meditations, there's like a lot of moments where you can go back, like your present self can you can visualize your present self going to your childhood self who might have gone through trauma or whatever it may be, and comforting your childhood self. And that in itself, just like that moment of meditation and love you give to your childhood self, will bring some clarity and peaceful energy and love into your present self. So moments like that. But also in the morning, I do morning pages, which is from this book by Julie Cameron called The Artist's Way, where basically you just have stream of consciousness down onto paper, 3 pages. And so when you start your day, all the BS that your mind, the monkey mind, is on paper and not in your mind anymore. So you kind of like give away that monkey mind to paper, which is a relief. And you can start your day with clarity. It doesn't always happen so clear, but it is always super helpful. And there's been a lot of breakthroughs in the morning pages. And then I do Wim Hof Breath Work, which is by this man named Wim Hof.
I love his work as well.
Giving oxygen to parts of our body that we never give oxygen to, and being very intentional with our breath. And when you do his Wim Hof breathing, it just kind of resets your body's equilibrium and it makes your breathing cycles so much more intentional and longer, where you can, and that's been proven, that amount of oxygen to different parts of your body has been proven to help you manage stress levels or high temperatures or low temperatures or different extreme scenarios so much better, because you've actually given proper levels of oxygen to every part of your body. There's so much more science behind that than I can even get into. So morning pages, Wim Hof, that's daily. Also, my friend taught me this. When you wake up, when you plant your feet on the ground, you say, today's going to be a good day. And you say, thank you, just gratitude. And if you're feeling tired, or instead of having your mind being like, oh, I didn't get enough sleep, I wanted to sleep but like 30 minutes more, I shouldn't have gone to bed so late, you narrate what you're doing in your head. So you bring yourself back to the present moment. So you're very intentional and very present. So you say, I'm walking to the bathroom. I'm reaching for my toothbrush. My right hand's reaching for my toothbrush. My left hand's reaching for my toothpaste. Joel Holder, my friend, did this whole video series that I thought was very helpful And so then you bring yourself back into the present moment. Again, it's all about not going into that monkey mind that exists in all of us. And it's so easy to go into. I also do journaling in a sense of asking myself questions. Where am I now? How am I feeling? And it's as detailed as, there's certain questions that I usually ask myself. What kind of energy do I need right now? If it's for work, do I need more ambitious energy? Do I need more calm energy? Do I need more focused energy? So that's a journaling session. And then during moments like whether it has to do with the full moon or a new moon or, the first of the month or a Sunday, whatever it may be, whatever resonates with you. I've had friends who have done it all across the spectrum, picking a time to then have another reflection moment. And it's to hold you accountable. My partner and I try to do this on every Sunday. We're like, what do we want to feel for the week? What are our goals for the week? Not goals as in like, I want to write 2 articles, but like, what do we want to feel? Like, bring in the emotions that you want to bring in. And because time is a continuum, there's a realm where you've already experienced this. So you want to like set yourself up that it went really well. It went the best that it could. So those are just some of the few things.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing. They're lovely. I love the Artist's Way as well. And Wim Hof, I'm a really big fan. And it's really lovely to hear about your journaling. And when you step onto your feet for the first time, just saying today's going to be a good day. That's something that everybody could do. But I can see how that just positions you from the very moment that you wake or emerge from your bed to set the energy that you want.
Yeah, and it brings you back to that moment. It's like, okay, I'm in my body.
And what about how you continue to explore how you can live and work more aligned with your purpose?
Yeah, so there's things that I do that I tap into other humans, beautiful souls that have these beautiful gifts that either can be hypnotherapy or energy healing or whatever that may be, like on a larger, like on a macro level. If I'm feeling maybe not in tune or I'm feeling off course, I work with a lot of different people that I turn to. And most of the time they tell me what I've already known deep down, but just like having them confirm it is what makes me pursue life a little bit differently. So for example, I've done a hypnotherapy session. I've done past life regression. I've done clairvoyance. I have friends who are astrologists. I was working with an energy healer all of last year. That was super helpful, which is basically like my therapist, but she's psychic and a medium and many different things as well. So I think that sometimes you could do all the self-work, but it is really valuable to seek a source outside of you to kind of like validate or confirm what you're already feeling and to kind of just like push you in the right way. Because if you're doing the self-work and you're journaling, you feel like you're kind of reaching a dead end every time. It's kind of nice to get like a little nudge from someone else.
And how do you choose those people? Because there's so many options out there and probably a range in what's right for you personally, also probably a range in how much they have to offer. And it can be overwhelming for people, I think. So how do you know?
It's so overwhelming. There's so many people. And at the beginning, I was so skeptical. I mean, I'm still skeptical a lot of times because I have a very logical side of my brain. And I'm like, wait, what do you do? How does that work? And so I think that's totally normal. I think that to differentiate from all the people that are light workers or do this work is really every person that I've worked with has been personally recommended from a good friend that I trust, a source that I trust. And I think that could be a good starting point. So the energy healer that I worked with for more than a year was recommended by a really good friend who also worked with her. This astrologist that I work with, she used to be a former colleague of mine at Vogue. She was the assistant to the creative director, and then she was doing astrology on the side because she loved it so much, and then she quit. And now she's a full-time astrologist, and now she's British Vogue's astrologer, like in-house astrologer, and has like a monthly column with them. So if I need something along astrology or just a natal chart reading, that's her. For hypnotherapy, I was really interested in understanding my past lives. And a friend recommended this guy who is a fashion stylist, but also was like born with these very interesting gifts. And he does hypnosis and he does past life regression. He also does hypnotherapy sessions. So I think just tapping into those who maybe either friends or family have already gone through. So that's kind of like the litmus test.
Yeah, I have to say it's the same for me. Any practitioner who I've worked with along those lines has also come through personal friends recommending, and I've never regretted any of them that I've done. Hypnotherapy I haven't tried, but that sounds amazing.
Yeah, no, it's super incredible. He does digital sessions now because of COVID, which he says works just as well or even better. So if you're interested, let me know.
Yeah, I'll have to ask you after. Interesting. I'm wondering then, through all of this, how has your view of what success means to you changed?
Great question. I think that success was very one-dimensional before my journey with understanding consciousness started. One-dimensional in the sense that success was, I have immigrant parents. They are both scientists and really value education because they grew up in communist China, and education was like their ticket out into the world and a safe future for both them and their children. So the fact that I haven't gotten my doctorates or my PhD or anything like that is like kind of wild to them. And I viewed success as a long time of job titles, salary pay, how much schooling or education I had. And then success was also defined by what society defines it. I think that a lot of times we work towards this success that society gives to us. And this entire time we're like, wait, we didn't even want to work towards those goals. We just thought that's what we needed to do to kind of thrive in this world. But now success is so multidimensional. It's not just one dimensional. It's not just my job title or my salary pay or my educational levels, or success is, am I aligned with my soul's purpose? Success is, am I bringing light to this world? Success is, am I bringing light to family and friends and my partner? Am I being a person that makes other people want to be their highest self as well? Success means, am I understanding what it means to be human? And all of that can be as simple as understanding how to be human. And I think, again, like that's something we've lost along the way because we've been in this hamster wheel. And now we're like, oh, wow, I love to just, watch the sunrise. And that in itself can mean success to you because you're present. And so being present, that in itself is success. And I think that a lot of times we can go through our whole lives and not be present. And it sounds so cliche and very simplified, but it really, that's what it boils down to.
It's beautiful. And so how are you bringing light into your life, or how do you aim to do that into the life of you and others?
On a macro level, I try to bring light by being very intentional with what I share and what I post on social media and to the platform that I have. Knowingly, when I left Vogue, I knew that I wanted to focus on conscious content because, one, I didn't want to make any content that made anyone feel shitty about themselves. I think that the internet is already such an easy place for that. You literally go on social media and you can start to feel shitty about yourself or comparing yourself. So I don't try to make any content that would ever induce those kind of feelings or thoughts. I try to share something that's educational, informative, joyful, something that is moving the needle in some aspect, whether how big or small that push may be. And in my personal life, how I'm trying to bring light is the more that I'm doing the self-work, the meditations, the breath works, the reflections, the more that I'm aligned to my soul's purpose and the more that I can bring light to people who are in my immediate circle and beyond. So if you're in tune with your soul's purpose, then you're already bringing light to the world just by being in alignment. So that in itself is bringing light, which you might not even realize that, but doing your life's work or doing your soul's purpose, and that might always be constantly changing as well. That is bringing light to this world. I think if we were all self-aware and rediscovering our consciousness and aligned on our soul's purpose, our world will look very differently. And I think we're getting there, which is why these movements have been happening. But yeah.
So how do you describe your soul's purpose then?
Yeah, that's a good question because that's like the question I would ask to like that's the question I would ask to every astrologist, hypnotherapist, energy healer, clairvoyant. I'm like, what is my soul's purpose? And I realized I was giving them so much power in answering that question. And your soul's purpose isn't going to be like a job description. It's not going to be like your soul's purpose is to, I don't know, redefine what journalism means in the 21st century, whatever it may be. It's like your soul's purpose is tapping into these skill sets that we were naturally born into and bringing them out into the world for a greater humanity, for the best of humanity. Like everything you do is not self-fulfilling. It's not fulfilling your ego, but fulfilling humanity in a way that we would have never been so satisfied just doing it for ourselves. So my soul's purpose, it constantly could be shifting, but I know at its core, it's communicating and telling stories and doing the kind of work that changes humanity and is for the greater good of humanity. Like I feel like every time I try to do a job, I'm like, am I going to do it for, I ask myself why I want to do it. And if one of the reasons it's not like, oh, I think this is going to be a good project or story or moment or whatever it may be for the rest of humanity, then I'm kind of like, okay, then I shouldn't be doing this. I think everything we do needs to operate in that sense. And if we all realize that we're all here to actually serve the greater good, wow, that like when I realized that we were all here, we all exist. Every single human and living thing exists to serve the greater good, not for ourselves. We're not in this like life for Sophia Li, so Sophia Li can feel like she lived a good life. No, like I'm here for a reason, and every single human is here, even, you know, as micro level as and we've learned this during the pandemic, essential workers that were so overlooked before, grocery store, male men and women, FedEx, UPS, all those delivery systems, hospital nurses, essential workers, job professions that were so overlooked, even janitors that kept these public services so clean so we can stay healthy. They are serving the greater good, and we all exist to serve the greater good. And I think a lot of people, we get lost in just serving our ego versus that.
We all exist to serve the greater good, and we can get lost in our ego. But when we realize that we're all here together to serve the greater good, then that's how we can really move beyond just doing things for ourselves. I love that. And I love how you have that question. I think it's a fantastic filter for yourself to ask, why do I want to do this? And to really consider what value it brings to the world before you make any decision.
Yeah. And I have to be honest, it's not so easy. There's so many times when I could take projects, or I'm very lured into taking things that is solely for my ego. And I think that's like the constant test and lesson that, you know, in Buddhism, there's like these 8 rings of consciousness. And it's like there's always this struggle between the ring of ego and the ring of our conscious. So it's always going to be this ongoing lesson and battle but it gets easier and easier every time. So,
yeah. Okay. So as we're coming to the end of our interview, just a couple more questions. I wanted to ask if there's a book you read recently that you loved that you can share with us.
Yeah, I have been reading The Celestine Prophecy that I've really loved, and it's really interesting. The whole notion is about this guy who goes on this grand adventure in Peru to discover these insights of life. And the biggest takeaways from the books is about this energy, about how energy works. And basically, I think when we're younger, we're taught that if we want energy, we get energy from other people, which is why, you know, we love being social. But a lot of times we can manipulate or dominate energy where we try to take energy from other people, and you've seen this a lot at work when people are gaslighting you or being manipulative or not being fair, or they are trying to take energy away from you. And, you know, parents do it to children, teenagers do it to parents, bosses do it to employees do it to bosses. You know, it happens all the time. And it's because we think we constantly need to be getting energy from other people. And what we don't realize is that the energy source that is most consistent, that isn't reliant on any person else, is actually from the energy source of us, the universe, and Mother Nature, because we're all connected. So it's like meditating or being in nature. There's this energy source that is so much more fulfilling and consistent than trying to take it from other people. And it's a nonfiction book, but it seems very realistic, like it could have happened.
Okay. Is there anything that comes into your mind as like a key takeaway from our conversation today, or a closing comment you want to share?
Yeah, I think the closing comment I want to share is that self-love is the start of your conscious journey. Self-love for yourself, self-love for the things that are around you, the environment that you live in, the nature that you live in, the world that you live in, the community that you live in. That starts your conscious journey. Because if we don't love ourselves, then ultimately how we're going to love the people around us, the nature around us, and our surroundings, to start to understand that we're all one conscious.
I love that. Thank you. Couldn't agree more. It all starts with self-love.
Yeah, and it sounds so cliche, and everyone's like, oh, self-care, self-love. And I'm like, no, self-love is like deep internal work. Really understand yourself. You want to be like the connoisseur of Nikki. You want to be the most well-read, well-educated, in tune Nikki, where you're so in tune with your body, like all so in tune with your spiritual self that you can understand when things are going amiss. And I think we get so detached from our souls and this awareness level of ourselves. And that's when we go on these like spirals or goose chases of what we think life should be, or trying to chase success. So just want to clarify that self-love is not self-care. Self-love is a lot of internal work that will take, I'm still doing it. It will take, I know so many of my mentors, they're doing it for decades. So it's a never ending process, but it's the best relationship you have is with yourself, and the longest one too.
Indeed. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. Well, I've loved speaking to you today and have got so much from our conversation. I'm sure other people will too. And it's been amazing hearing about your journey and your thoughts, especially at this time where things really are changing, hopefully forever in our world.
Yes, I agree. Hopefully forever in our world. Thank you so much for having me, Nikki.
Thank you. And one last thing, just where can our listeners find you online?
I think Instagram is the best platform. My handle is at Soph, SOPHFEI.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Nikki.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation as much as I did. I've really noticed people opening up to their vulnerability through this COVID time, as we talked about at the beginning, and I hope this will be a positive effect that will help us to connect with ourselves and with each other on a deeper and more authentic level. Let's hope the barriers we break down now stay down. There is nothing as important as developing our relationship with ourselves, building our self-love. How Sophia frames this journey as the start of our path to consciousness really resonates with me. I couldn't agree more, and have experienced that personally too. I also love Sophia's definition of sustainability, which is about how every action has a reaction in life, and sustainability means coming back to the equilibrium, instead of taking and not giving back. I think this beautifully illustrates how a sustainable lifestyle begins with awareness. Not with guilt or judgment, but with taking responsibility for the decisions we make, the way we vote with our wallet, and making incremental changes however we can. Not to constrain ourselves, but rather to enrich our lives with the harmony it brings. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe now and leave a 5-star review. It means so much more to me than you realize. Aside from podcasting, I coach and consult conscious entrepreneurs and changemakers to help them build their personal power, align with their purpose, and guide them to excel in times of transition in business and relationships. I work with one-on-one clients and run a group program too. To find out more and stay up to date on my coaching, podcasting, and inspiration, you can find me on Instagram at Nikki Trott, that's NIKKITROTT, or on my website, nikkitrott.com. I'd love to hear from you, and you can DM me on Instagram or email me through my website if you have any questions or comments, or want to find out about working with me. See you next Wednesday on the next episode of Going Conscious. And until then, Live your freedom.